Cyberball! Football in the 21st century. So, yeah, football can be redeemed, and apparently it is redeemed by making you play as robots. There are some weird concepts I didn't pick up on the game, like the use of money, and I don't really understand how the plays work. I don't know if that's because I don't understand how football works, or the game is just a little more convoluted than it needs to be. The presentation is cool, the idea is fun, and I actually played this game for longer than a minute, so this is probably my favorite sports game I've played in the Sega thus far. Good job, Cyberball. You did good. Atomic Robo-Kid by Trico. This game is really strange, and I am not the biggest fan of it. It is definitely a side-scroller shoot-'em-up. I don't really like this game, and it's mostly because of how tight the hallway you fly down is. It's really strange that they waste so much of the screen real estate with just organic hallway. And as cool as that aesthetic is, it feels weird here for little Atomic Robo-Kid. Also, why is Atomic Robo-Kid a baby space jockey? I feel like this game has just got H.R. Giger knockoff all over it, and they just didn't know what to do with the other 25% of the screen real estate they wasted, so they just made it nasty looking hallway. I don't know. Atomic Robo-Kid, maybe I'm being harsh, but I just don't like it.
Sword of Vermilion by Sega.
This game is surprisingly similar to Super Hydlide. You play as a knight who is the long-lost son of a king, and you must go off on an epic quest adventure. In the same vein as Super Hydlide, this game is a top-down RPG that focuses more on the simulation side of an action fantasy adventure. The main difference between this and Super Hydlide is it's a little crisper and easier to look at, and also the sections that are between your dungeons and your town is a sort of simulated 3D dungeon crawler space, which is kind of neat. It's definitely different enough from Super Hydlide that it stands out on its own, but it's also similar enough that if you really liked the one, I guarantee you will like the other. Definitely check it out if a more old-school Western RPG is what you're looking for. I highly recommend it. Shadow Blasters by Sage's Creation. Shadow Blasters is a pretty neat game. It may seem like a very typical action platformer to begin with, but the first surprise will come when you die, and you have to pick a different character to pick up the torch and continue playing, which is a really cool concept. So instead of having lives in the more traditional video game sense, you actually play as the 4 different characters, and when one dies, the other picks up the torch and carries on. It's pretty neat too because each character has different weapons and skills that come in handy for the different enemies and bosses you have to face. Each character having a different weapon set brings different strategies and ways to approach things, which can make some bosses incredibly easy or incredibly difficult. I really like that the game forces you to experiment around and to learn the different characters, and each level is fairly unique and fun. The game reminds me a lot of Mystic Defender. You guys do remember Mystic Defender, right? Purple Goku in H.R. Giger Land versus the Goo Babies? Come on, who can forget that? I gotta say, out of the two, I really like this one just for the character swapping mechanic. It's super cool, and I think it really plays out to its benefit. Even though some of the game mechanics can be a little wonky, the more you play, the more you get used to it, and I definitely think that Shadow Blasters is one of the more underrated games I have played on the Sega Genesis thus far. Definitely would recommend to anyone who's a fan of games in this genre. Shadow Dancer, The Secret of Shinobi. Yes, this is a sequel to Revenge of the Shinobi. No, it's not. Actually, it is the second game in the Shinobi series that was then ported from the arcade to home console, releasing after Revenge of the Shinobi, the third title in the series, a year later. Is that confusing enough? I'm thoroughly confused. So being part of the Shinobi series, you have your classic Shinobi traits like throwing shurikens and casting magical spells. It differs in that the game is focused on more of a 2-platform system where there is your upper platform and your lower platform, and you have to traverse between the two in order to attack the things that are on the different platforms in the level. Unlike Revenge of the Shinobi, the sequel that came out before this, you have one hit life. So if you get hit once, you die. Shadow Dancer's Secret of Shinobi also features a canine companion, which is kind of cool. He will go and attack enemies for you, which is very helpful, given that you kind of want to hang back and cover a lot of the time. But at the same time, I had a little trouble getting him to attack on command when I wanted him to. It could have just been I didn't know how to do it right, but he did seem flaky at best. Shadow Dancer definitely feels inferior to Revenge of the Shinobi in every way. The unlimited shurikens is a plus, but everything else just seems like a really strong minus. Very odd that they released this after Revenge of the Shinobi. Doesn't make sense to me at all. If I was a child that had Revenge and I saw Shadow Dancer, I would be so excited to think, oh yeah, another Shinobi game, only to find out that it's a really crappy port of a prequel. I don't understand it at all, but I'm sure money had something to do with it. Shadow Dancer, a inferior prequel sequel. Check it out. Bimini Run by New Vision. What is a Bimini? A Bimini is the westernmost district of the Bahamas and comprises of a chain of islands about 53 miles due east of Miami. What is Bimini Run? An awesome freaking game for the Sega Genesis. So Bimini Run is kind of neat. It's kind of an open world free roam police boat simulator. And I love it to death. This game is so cool. It's pseudo 3D. It uses that kind of cool Mode 7 3D effect we've talked about before. And you basically drive a boat around these various islands, and you look for criminals and drug dealers and helicopters. And it does a really good job of like simulating this whole thing. You have two guns, you have a machine gun and a rocket launcher, and you start off in a very like public area that's full of boats and tourists. And then when you move out further and further in the ocean, it gets more isolated and more deadly, and there's attack choppers and attack boats. And it's a really clever, well-done game. My mind is kind of blown by this because it's really well done. Really, really well done. I kind of scoffed when I first started playing, thinking this game is going to be terrible. Who wants to play a boat chase game? But it is some of the most fun I have had in a boat in a game, period. It reminds me a lot of some of the things that Rockstar has done with Grand Theft Auto, specifically some of the Vice City missions. Bimini Run is pretty awesome. I definitely recommend checking it out if this is your kind of thing. It's a very neat experience. For this week's fan request, we're going to be looking at the X-Men games. Thanks to the 43rd Fire Demon and to Yeti for requesting these. Hope you guys enjoy it. Starting with the first game that is just titled X-Men, it is an action platformer, and holy crap, this game is hard. I hadn't actually played this one before. Gotta say, this is a difficult game. But just like navigating the levels themselves are so complicated and confusing. Man, like I feel like you almost needed a player's guide if you wanted to actually just traverse this game in any sort of reasonable fashion. You get to play as 4 different X-Men, which is pretty neat. Each one has their own unique set of powers and abilities, so they're not all just clones of each other, which is kind of cool. My favorite for this game was easily Nightcrawler. I found him to be the most useful simply because he could teleport through certain places that I couldn't figure out how to get around anyway. So he was almost a must-play character. I don't know how many of you watched this cartoon growing up, but this was my jam back in the day. And just the fact that it's Magneto taking over the Danger Room, and you get to play as all these cool characters, makes this game pretty cool. The difficulty kind of brings it down. But that's not to say it's not a good game, it's just a really hard game, and I had a lot of trouble progressing past the first level. One really cool thing about this game is when you fall off, instead of dying, Jean Grey comes and picks you up, at the cost of a little bit of your health, which is kind of neat. This feature and the ability to summon other X-Men makes for a really great adaptation of the show. This game captures everything that's cool about being an X-Man, and I love it for that. The sequel, X-Men 2: The Clone Wars, however, is an amazing game, and I remember renting this from Blockbuster multiple times. Just to show you how cool this game is, check out how it starts when you turn on the console. Yeah, that's right. It just jumps right in. No introduction screen, no Sega. It just puts you right in there. And depending on which direction you're holding the gamepad, you get to play as different characters. So once you play through this first level, then the game actually quote unquote starts and you get to pick your character and progress with the story. The most obvious thing I can say about X-Men 2 Clone Wars is that it is highly cinematic compared to the first. There's so many amazing set pieces and all the characters are so well animated, it's hard not to gush over how good this game is. Also, it has an amazing soundtrack. X-Men 2 Clone Wars might be one of my favorite games for the Genesis, just because it's such a great action platformer, it makes such good use of the source material, and it's just a lot of fun to play and to look at. Like, this is the whole package as far as Sega games go. It is worth noting that both of these games have multiplayer, and I brought Kitetails in to play with me, but it's kind of funny. Having not ever played the multiplayer before, immediately I noticed that 1, it makes the game much harder for both of them. Sharing a screen does not work very well for these games. Also, X-Men 2 Clone Wars got a really bad frame rate drop, and the game almost became unplayable having played it by myself earlier. Kind of weird that they did that. But I guess back in the day when you had a little brother you had to share a controller with, you'd take whatever you could get. Both of these games are really cool. Obviously, I like one more than the other, but I feel like it's unfair to compare, and they made so many improvements with the sequel, you can't not be proud of them for doing it. Definitely check out either of these if you're a fan of the X-Men or a fan of action platformers. They are awesome.